Advanced Principles Podcast, or APP, was created to be an outlet for like-minded individuals to share in the broader conversations on leadership, retail market updates, and incredible personal success stories. On APP, you will hear a collection of stories from the titans of the retail industry, as well as thought and practice leaders covering the spectrum of the economy. Please click the subscribe button and look for the newest episodes to be released.
I got to think one of the leading institutions on teaching emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Both feet, and have never looked back and have never regretted a single moment of it.
Melvin L. Smith, Ph.D., is a professor in the Department of Organizational Behavior and faculty director of executive education at the Katz Weatherhead School of Management. He is also chairman of the board of the Graduate School Alliance for Education and Coaching, board president of the Edge Sports and Arts Academy, and board member of the Will-Burt Company. Dr. Smith received his Ph.D. in Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management from the University of Pittsburgh's Katz Graduate School of Business. He also holds a bachelor's degree in General Management and Accounting from Purdue University and an MBA in Marketing from Clark Atlanta University. Dr. Smith's research and teaching focus on leadership and emotional intelligence in the workplace, as well as the development and use of human and social capital in organizations through executive coaching. He is co-author of the book, Helping People Change: Coaching with Compassion for Lifelong Learning and Growth. In addition to his work with numerous U.S. organizations, Melvin has worked with executives in Canada, Dubai, India, New Zealand, Scotland, and Trinidad. He has also served as a visiting professor at ESAD Business School in Barcelona, Spain, where he co-taught a senior executive education course on emotionally intelligent leadership. Prior to completing his doctoral work at the University of Pittsburgh, Melvin spent over 15 years in a series of sales, marketing management, and organization development positions with a number of Fortune 500 companies, including IBM, Pepsi-Cola, and H.J. Heinz.
All right. Wow. What an impressive background and bio. Melvin Smith, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be a part of APP and a guest here on our show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to spending some time talking with you today, Ryan.
Yeah. I know there is so much to go in. This is probably 10 episodes worth of conversation. We're going to do our best here to stay on track, but I'm so excited to get into your background, your philosophies. I've learned so much from you, and I know everyone listening will as well. So let's just start at the most simplistic point and just a little brief background on yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So again, as highlighted in my bio, I mean, I am currently a professor in organizational behavior, which is one of the roles I play, where I do research in the area of leadership and leadership development, broadly speaking, with the focus on executive coaching and the role that plays in leadership development. But I also teach those same topics in a variety of our programs, our Ph.D. program, our executive MBA program, our Masters of Organization Development, or actually Positive Organization Development as we frame it. But then I also have the role of Faculty Director of Executive Education, where I get involved in working with organizations of all types all over the world to help them, their leaders, learn more about these concepts of leadership and improve their leadership capability. So I play that role as well. So I haven't always been in that space, again, as comes across in my bio, but so I was actually in the corporate world for about 15 years. In a variety of sales and marketing management roles, some major Fortune 500 companies. But at some point during that corporate career, I decided I wanted to make a career change and really a life change and get into what I was doing today. So again, after going back and getting my PhD in organizational behavior and human resource management, I decided to join the faculty here at Case, and I've been here for about 20 years now. So
wow, very, very cool. So obviously in your corporate life, kind of dissecting the life, corporate and academia, you were very successful, held prominent positions within some very significant organizations, as your bio indicates. I think a lot of people have some of that mid-career thought and exploring different ideas. What really led you to want to explore this path? And from all things that I can gather, you were on a great trajectory in the corporate world. What really was it a calling? Was it in your heart? Was it just something emotional that you had an attachment to, or where do you think that came from?
Yeah, great question. And it was really a combination of things, I would say, Ryan. I always knew when I started my journey in the corporate world that I didn't want to just kind of progress all the way up the ranks and retire as a corporate executive. I kind of had an entrepreneurial kind of desire. So I wanted to kind of get as much corporate experience as I could and then launch off into something on my own. I kind of have this real high need for autonomy. So kind of being my own boss and kind of doing what I really want to do as opposed to, just reporting in some structured way up some chain of command. So that was part of it that was kind of always there. And then the more time I spent in the corporate world, and I was having great success, as you said, and enjoying kind of the things I was doing, I think making a difference to the organizations where I worked. But I was also missing kind of something that really kind of gave me a greater sense of meaning and purpose. So I was doing very well in sales and marketing manager roles, making a lot of money for the companies that I worked for and doing well for myself financially. But again, the meaning just wasn't there. And again, I always had that kind of bug in me about doing something more entrepreneurial or autonomous. And then over time, I realized that my wife was never going to be comfortable with me launching off and starting my own business and being an entrepreneur. She's just a very risk-averse person. So I saw that wasn't going to be in my future, but I still didn't want to stay within the confines of kind of the corporate world. So that's when I started exploring this idea of academia. And I'd always thought about at some point in my life, probably later in my career or post-career, doing some adjunct teaching, consulting kind of stuff in a university kind of environment. So I started looking into what would it take to, at this stage in my life and career, actually go back and get a PhD and become an academic and be a speaker and an author and a consultant and all that stuff. So I started looking into it and got really excited about it and felt that, wow, this kind of would really satisfy kind of that, in many ways, that entrepreneurial urge I have, because as an academic, someone framed it to me as I was going through this thought process that really you can consider yourself to be an intellectual entrepreneur where your product is knowledge. So I got really excited about that so I could satisfy that desire to kind of do something that I felt would have more meaning and purpose in terms of feeding into and speaking to others in their growth and development and learning, but also satisfied that urge for autonomy and then that entrepreneurial spirit. So I got excited about it, started looking into it, and then jumped into it both feet and have never looked back and have never regretted a moment of it.
And here we are 20 years later.
Exactly.
Just fantastic. Yeah. What an amazing perspective. I've never thought of it that way. But I've always admired any level of academia. One, I think the discipline and dedication it takes to achieve the levels of degrees that you certainly have. But also you get to play a role in so many different lives and get to participate in so many different things. It's very different than being a department lead or even the president or business unit manager of a certain silo of business, because that's still very isolated. Whereas you get to touch so many different landscapes and so many different industries. And, obviously now with your travels, so many different cultures that just has to be fascinating for you.
Yeah, it really is. That's one thing that has great appeal. I mean, I have a wide variety of interests, and like I said, just like I didn't want to be locked into that corporate structure. I mean, I just like to have the end of the world be my oyster, and again, to play a little bit in this sandbox and a little bit in that sandbox, and especially with my role in executive education, I still get to keep a foot in the kind of organizational or corporate world, if you will. But to your point, across a wide variety of individuals and organizations and industries and geographies. So I kind of have that kind of the best of both worlds in my current role, which I love.
Yeah. And you get to play student, I would imagine, teacher almost every single day, because you're learning about the new businesses that you're being exposed to and probably gathering and harnessing some of that knowledge and then, putting that out there to the rest of your students and faculty and everybody else that you interact with. What an amazing resource now that you can become and have become.
So I mean, I'm in the dream role and job. I mean, I couldn't craft a better space for myself to have landed. I wouldn't have predicted or planned it when I started out that this is where it was going to be. But the way that it's worked out, I mean, I'm in what I feel is the ideal spot for me.
Kind of like the ideal self. Maybe familiar with an exercise that we've gone through together. That's right.
Right.
So executive education is really, for me, it's kind of at a fever pitch. I think every year it has grown in interest and acknowledgement. The course offerings are seemingly endless nowadays. And I remember when I was early in my career, I worked with a professor from Western Kentucky University, one of the large companies I worked for.
Yep.
And I don't think executive education had the foothold in the corporate world that it does today. Why do you think it has gained so much in popularity and now the offerings are so expansive?
Yeah, good question. I think it's partially because as our society, I mean, as everyone is aware, just the rate of change and the things that people experience individually and then organizationally, it just continues to accelerate. And because of that, no matter what type of degree you have in terms of your formal education, no matter what type of experience you have, in order to be able to be current, to stay on top of the latest kind of trends, developments, opportunities, challenges, you have to keep learning as a leader, right? If you're not continually learning as a leader with the rate of change that we're experiencing, you're falling behind, right? So executive education is that way to allow leaders to continue to learn and grow, post their formal education experience. So the fact that it provides that in the moment continuing education opportunity, that's why it's so relevant. That's why it continues to thrive. It continues to grow. And I think the other thing that it does is it's not just from an individual learning perspective, but because in executive education, you also have what we do a lot of that we call custom executive education, where companies can send cohorts of individuals to a particular program or development experience. You have an opportunity not only to speak into individuals and help them learn and grow, but you have a whole host of leaders from an organization going through a similar leadership development experience where they're developing common language, common frameworks and models and ways of thinking. They're building relationship with one another that then translate from that classroom experience back into the workplace. So there are other benefits that organizations are realizing are invaluable. Because of that, I think executive will continue to grow and continue to thrive well into the future.
Yeah, I think that's just an excellent point. And now that really made me think, when I first got introduced to what executive education was, it was just the executive being educated.
Right.
And then they were left to cast that message to the rest of the team. And we all know how that goes. So I think that idea of now cohorts assembling and either attending a course or you attending a session at their facility really then helps it leak through the rest of the culture in the company and really bleed in and become integrated, as you said, in their vocabulary and everything else they're doing. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. It really does. And we see that continue.
Yeah. Do you think a part of it is how much more integrated the universe has become? I mean, it used to be you had industrial and you had technology and you had consumer products, but now, whether it's manufacturing or consumer products or industrial or whatever it is, at some level, they're all integrated from a business sense landscape. And I think in those cohorts, those different executives can learn from each other. Do you think that's led to the appeal and the growth of it as well?
Oh, no, I do. You're exactly right. And what we find when we have those cohort types of programs is that even though these individuals in these various disciplines and functions are working in the same organization, sometimes for whatever reason, they're not having the conversations that they end up having when they're on site in the middle of a program. So they come there and then they're in this environment where they've all been plucked out of their natural work environment. And now we're in this learning space. And all of a sudden they start having these meaningful conversations that aren't necessarily taking place. And they go back and then translate that. And then the conversations change when they go back at work again. So so that integration or that need to be integrated, I think is the key thing. And sometimes it doesn't happen as much as you think it would or should in the workplace, whereas that executive education environment, that classroom environment, that leadership development environment provides a fertile space for those conversations to take place. Yeah,
so cool. And so spot on as well. So now a little bit tougher of a topic here because there's an old adage out there that says, those who can do and those who can't teach. I'm sure that's not new to you. I think it's probably starting to wane a little bit in society, but how do you address that? That goes back, my entire professional career, I've heard that phrase. And how do you overcome that and kind of just, tamping that down just a little bit?
No, you're right. It is something, it's one of those things that comes from our culture is we're such a culture of doers and doing gets rewarded. But it's also important that we have thinkers, right? And people can not only think, but then kind of translate those thoughts and share those thoughts with others in meaningful ways to help them in their learning about what they're doing and how they do that, right? So that's why one of the reasons I think that I've been able to be successful in this executive education environment is because unlike some colleagues in certain executive education spaces or university spaces who have just been academics all their lives, and then they're really more prey to that, well, you know, those who can't teach, and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I have a history. I had 15 years of very successful doing. And, you know, when I left that environment, any organization I left was like, look, we want you to stay. We love the contributions you're making. So, I mean, I have demonstrated success. Yeah, I can do it. That doesn't mean that just because I teach it now doesn't mean I can't do it. I just enjoy being able to kind of convey to other people and to help them more effectively do what they're doing. So the world takes all types, and it's not a matter of ability as much as it is kind of an interest in terms of where do you feel you're best suited and what do you really enjoy doing most. And again, for me, that's the teaching and the sharing. It doesn't have to mean that I can't do it just because I'm teaching it. And so having demonstrated that I can do it, it kind of dispels that myth a little bit. And even while I'm teaching, when I'm having conversation with executives, and I'm sharing my experiences and telling stories about what's happening, you know, this guy gets it. Yeah. So it's not like, yeah, this ivory tower guy has no idea how to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think having that blend of the practical real world experience as well as kind of that academic piece helps me personally when I'm in touch with people kind of dispel that myth that there's this kind of doing/teaching gap or gulf, if you will, and you can have individuals who are capable of doing both.
Yeah. And I think anyone that spends 5 minutes conversing with you, pick up on it really quick. You can walk the walk, you can talk the talk, you can do it all. But certainly I think worthy of the audience being able to hear how that is addressed and overcome some of the stigma that, hey, I should sign up, I should seek some additional information and knowledge and so forth. So now, leadership is a big, broad, expansive word and takes on all kinds of different definitions for all kinds of different people.
Yep.
Throughout your corporate career and now your career in academics and your executive coaching and your facilitating and consulting and everything else that you do, how many different progressions of leadership have you seen? Because it seems like it's never ending, which is, I think, a good thing, but sometimes it seems a little too frequent.
Yeah. So it's hard to kind of quantify that, but I will say that there are certainly over the years, you know, quote unquote fads, you know, kind of the hot button topic that's kind of emerged and everybody's like on fire about it, and then it fizzles, and then the next one bubbles up and that fizzles, and so I won't point specific fingers because some of those are still around, like many of those are still around, and whether or not something is a fad or it's real in many ways just depends on who you ask about it. so I won't start pointing fingers at specific kind of fads or topics or waves. But what I will say is that when you do see a leadership topic or approach or a model that endures the test of time, it tends to be because it's not just something that somebody kind of coined a cute term or came up with a model that looked really appealing, but instead it's evidence-based. So it's something that's been researched, and not just a single study, but ideally multiple studies that show, yes, doing this leads to this certain set of desired outcomes. And that's why what we hang our hat on is sharing with individuals evidence-based principles and topics around leadership that, again, we found do stand the test of time. So even though they may sound like, oh, that's going to be another one of those faddish topics, it's not, because again, it's rooted in years, or in many cases, decades now of research to show that, hey, look, this makes a difference. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for certain desired outcomes, we know this increases your likelihood of achieving those desired outcomes.
Yeah. And I think it adds so much believability to it because you have so much hard evidence,
right,
from the scientific standpoint, but then you have the practical evidence of case study after case study after case study, which really backs it up. And I think it takes the naysayers out of the room. And I do think everything that I've heard you speak about or reference, it definitely has stickiness to it. It's not a fad. It's not going away. It is just what works in the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. And you bring up a great point, because sometimes you can have all the research evidence in the world, but unless you can also speak to that practical real world application and show that, yeah, based upon, thousands of people I've worked with in various industries and organizations all over the world, I can tell you, unless you kind of have that actual practical hands-on experience with it personally and or people you've worked with, it's hard to get some people to believe, right? So the research data, absolutely critical. But again, that very real applied evidence in terms of, yeah, I've seen this work personally in my own leadership travels, but then with countless leaders that I've worked with over the years, that's how you get people to believe. It's like, okay, wow, okay, yeah, you've actually got the evidence from a number of perspectives, rigorous academic research, but then also very applied real world application.
Yeah, and I think that makes a world of difference. And certainly for me, and I think a lot of others as well, just the way they digest and absorb that information is fantastic. So as we talked about, executive education just continues to grow and grow and grow. And within that, you can almost find a course on anything, how to teach people how to punch in and out. There's some, very frivolous ones out there, but there are some that are just magnificent. And I don't think talked about wildly and passionately enough. And certainly a couple of those things that you've embraced. And I kind of want to get into why you've latched onto them so much, why you're so passionate about them, and why they're so good, which is the growth mindset, resonant leadership, and emotional intelligence, which I know are three very big distinctive categories, but you do such a fantastic job of blending them all together. How were you drawn to that? What about that drew you in? Because you do speak with such passion and conviction about it. And I'm just curious as to how you got there.
Yeah. So for me, it was interesting, great question. And I was kind of drawn to it. And so when I finished my doctorate, my actual dissertation research wasn't specifically in that area. But when I encountered the faculty here at Case Western Reserve University at the Weatherhead School, and in particular, Richard Boyatzis, who became probably my closest colleague, co-author, mentor, et cetera, and learned of the work that he was doing, I was so drawn to it, again, not necessarily even because of my academic background and preparation and the work that I had done in that space, but because it made so much sense and explained so much of what I had experienced in my 15 years in the corporate world, that I saw, yes, it applied. It explained to me very clearly why some leaders I encountered over that space, and even looking at myself included, why they've been able to be successful in certain instances and why other leaders are not so successful or as effective. And so it had tremendous face validity in terms of it just made sense, that model of emotional intelligence, right? That's that concept of creating resonance with others as you lead them. But then also seeing, as I said, and we talked about before, the rigorous research behind it, explaining exactly why it works. I was just drawn to that and saying, yeah, I want to be able to share that with others. And because I know from firsthand experience from 15 years and living it, as well as from an academic perspective, that this is very real. And I want people to appreciate and understand that. So I teach it now very passionately because I fully and firmly believe in it, and I know that it works, and I know that if people embrace those concepts, it will make a difference in their effectiveness as leaders. So I get great pleasure and joy out of helping people learn more about and grow along their journey of doing those things more effectively.
Yeah, and with you having a sales background, one, it had a higher level of credibility with me because that's where my career has been.
Right.
Generally, I think when people think of sales managers, sales executives, they envision kind of the typical stereotype in that role, which is rule with an iron fist, lead by intimidation, whatever it is. So I think that resonant and dissonance really resonated, no pun intended, with me. And do you think that you are starting to see a sizable shift in leadership across all industries from somewhat of that deficit-based or negativity or fear-based leadership to the resonant aspect of it and the positivity and the growth mindset?
Most certainly. So by no means are we there where there's been this major sea change and shift and everybody sees the light, but more and more organizations, more and more individuals are becoming curious about it, are inquiring about it. I mean, we stay in executive education as busy as we can possibly be with organizations from all over the world who want to learn more about it and who want their leaders to experience this either singly or in groups. And when people actually attend the programs and learn about it, you see light bulbs going off. So more and more people are starting to get it. And not only they're getting it, but they're beginning to share the message with others when they go back to their organizations. Again, whether they be onesie twosies or large groups of leaders who came through collectively. So I am seeing a shift. I think we still have a long way to go, but I see definite progress.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is even when people get it, they know that this different way of leading and interacting or engaging with others is probably a better way. There are times when the pressure to make the numbers this quarter or this month or this year still, win the day, and then they revert back to that heavy-handed fist pounding, like we got to do this kind of behavior. But at least when people are aware, they kind of can sometimes at least be mindful or cognizant of the fact that this is probably not the right thing to do long term. So as long as we can at least plant that seed and help people understand that there's probably a better way, then that's progress in my book. So.
Yeah, and I think that it's just a fantastic segue into the next questions about emotional intelligence, because a lot of it is self-awareness.
Yeah.
And it's that ability to recognize within yourself that you are doing or not doing a certain action, or not saying or saying certain words. And I was raised kind of in my professional careers, you can't teach speed, you can't teach intelligence. And now come to find out, but you can definitely teach emotional intelligence. So for the benefit of the audience, would you mind just giving a brief recap on emotional intelligence and why it's so important in leadership and management and development journeys today?
Yeah, no, sure, happy to. And again, that was one of the things that drew me to it, was its simplicity. I mean, emotional intelligence is really all about the ability to do four fairly simple things well. And that's to understand yourself, right? To effectively manage yourself, to understand others, and to manage relationships. It's those four things: understanding yourself and managing yourself, understanding others, and managing relationships. And those four simple concepts, and I always tell people that they're simple, but not easy, if you understand that distinction. And conceptually, it makes a lot of sense, pretty simple, but being able to consistently do those four things does not necessarily come easy to everyone. But the beauty of it is, as you just said, is you can learn how to do all four of those things. Now to translate those four things into that model of emotional intelligence that we teach, then really it's all about being self-aware, engaging in self-management, being socially aware, and engaging in relationship management. And each of those four areas has specific competencies and then behaviors associated with them. So it breaks down into very concrete things you can do in the moment, day in, day out, to more effectively demonstrate those four major areas. So, I love it because of its simplicity. I love it because of the applicability. And again, we have now at this point decades of research showing that individuals who do those four things well end up being, number one, better leaders, but at all levels of the organization, higher performers. So it makes a difference.
The research is amazing. I think the stories and the information that you share about it. And I encourage everyone, if they haven't gone down the path of discovering more about emotional intelligence and the role it plays within yourself, your leadership capabilities, and your cultural capabilities, please do so. I definitely get your hands on as much information as you can. And I'd certainly recommend they check out Weatherhead. I got to think one of the leading institutions on teaching emotional intelligence in the workplace, and going from there. So you talked about self-awareness. And I think that that's a big part, right? And it probably comes up near the beginning for a lot of different reasons. I certainly don't know all of those, but I think within leaders, you're dealing with some ego and hubris to get to the level of leadership. I think there's a little bit of that mixed in there. So there's almost some level of disconnect with that self-awareness, where there's a lack of recognition of who I really am, what's my real self, as you all have coined it in the classroom, in the courses. Why do you think it's tough for people if they're starting to explore this personal journey to really come to grips with who they are and take objective feedback and really look hard in the mirror and come up with that self-awareness and put the ego and all the hubris and everything else aside and just get down to the nitty-gritty of who they really are?
Yeah. I think there are a few reasons. Kind of first and foremost at the surface level is the fact that, as I said, we're kind of a doing culture. So sometimes we're so busy just going and doing and doing and doing that we don't take the time to stop and to reflect and to examine ourselves and to turn that lens inside and to actually engage in the work of reflection and self-awareness. So part of it is just not even taking the time to stop and do it. But to your point, even if we do, there's sometimes a hesitancy to turn that lens inward because of our egos. We're afraid of what we might see and have to acknowledge if we do so, right? Like if I'm being successful and things are going well, I'm achieving some results, why do I want to turn this lens inward and expose potential flaws, right? So, and especially if and many people do face this whole imposter syndrome, like I'm thinking like, man, how the heck did I get in this job, right? How did I get in this role? And people really knew, what I know about myself. They say, why is he in that job? Why is she in that role? So we really are hesitant sometimes to turn that light inward because we don't want to expose those flaws, not only to ourselves, but to others, right? And so I think that's part of it as well, is just saying, hey, look, if I just keep going and not even look inward, I don't have to address that, just so I don't have to worry about not meeting the standard I might have for myself or what other people might expect of me. But then something else that happens is if you get beyond the doing piece and do turn the light inside, if you get beyond the ego piece and say, I'm willing to look at my flaws, then there's this hesitancy sometimes to seek that guidance or help or assistance from others in growing in ways that we need to grow based on certain limitations we may have, right? Because that looks like a sign of weakness, right? If you can't, and in our culture, unfortunately, it's like there's this mindset or mentality that you got to be self-made, right? You got to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it all on your own, right? So because of that kind of macho attitude that we sometimes have, we're reluctant to reach out for help or take assistance or seek guidance or coaching from others because that seems like I'm weak. I can't do it on my own. I have to turn to somebody else for help. So that unfortunately prevents some people from reaching out and doing that tough internal work and then seeking guidance and help as they look to make change. So all those things combined, I think, contribute to the fact that sometimes people are not really aware of their real selves. They don't take that hard look. They just kind of keep plowing forward, however they are.
Yeah. It's, vulnerability, I think, is started to pick up pace in conversations.
Right.
And I think it plays such a role in all of this. And you touched on many aspects of it. None of us are perfect. We all have room for growth. For any day that we're walking on this earth, we have room for growth. And I think leaders out there need to take that and say, I can do better. I can get better. I can learn more. Let me just expose a little bit of these vulnerabilities out here and see where I can go from there. So I think it's just spot on. And I really hope people take away from that and just kind of reach out and just at least show that curiosity that you mentioned and just ask some questions to get started in the conversation.
Yeah, you're right. It's two great words you use there: curiosity and vulnerability. Those are both key components to growth for anyone. You have to be willing to demonstrate both of those. Yeah.